Hey y'all, and welcome to my first ever book review. Today I want to talk about The Plot by Jean Hanff Korelitz. For those of you who haven't seen my sort of channel trailer video, a quick disclaimer, this probably isn't going to be the most breakthrough analysis or the most in-depth possible video. I want my videos to be really chill discussions about books, so today I just kind of want to go over all of the thoughts and feelings that I had while reading the plot. With that being said, obviously this is just going to be my opinion. If you guys have also read this book, I would love to hear your thoughts on it in the comments below. I mean, that is like the entire point of having this channel, is to talk about books with you guys. So yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts and feelings. In order to give all of my thoughts though, this is going to be a very spoiler-filled review. I am going to start off with a spoiler-free section, and then I'll let you guys know when it gets into spoiler territory. But I just kind of wanted to warn you in advance that the spoiler-free section is probably going to be very short, because I feel like there's only so much I can say without revealing how the story goes. I also wanted to give the disclaimer that I am filming in my living room, and my cat Reese is also here. So if you hear her or see her at any point in this video, or if you see me moving my arms kind of weirdly, it's probably because I'm petting her. Sorry if that bothers you, but this is my cat's house as well. I'm very much a cat person, so she's gonna do as she pleases, and it shouldn't be too distracting, I hope. So yeah, with all of those disclaimers out of the way, let's go ahead and get started. The plot of the plot, which that sentence is going to get very confusing, follows Jake Bonner as the main character. Jake is someone who has always wanted to be an author. He knew from a very young age that that's what he wanted to do with his life, and technically speaking, he has succeeded. He had one novel that was pretty successful and one novel that was much less so. By the time we as readers come into Jake's story though, by his own admission, he wouldn't call himself a successful writer. It's been a very long time since he's actually gotten anything published, and he suffers with pretty much chronic writer's block. Instead of writing, Jake is teaching a creative writing course. While teaching one year, he meets a student named Evan Parker. Evan claims to be in the middle of writing a story so revolutionary that he doesn't even have to be good at writing for it to be published. The plot itself is just so amazing that anyone could write it and it would be worthy of being published. Jake eventually gets Evan to tell him what exactly this plot is, and upon hearing it, he's really dismayed to have to admit that Evan is right. The storyline is so phenomenal that whoever writes it will be launched to instant success. However, the story never does get written. After a few years, during which Jake becomes less and less successful and relevant, he decides to check up on Evan Parker, only he finds out that Evan died before he was able to write his book. After making that discovery and not thinking very much, Jake decides that the story is so amazing that it absolutely has to be told, and since he's the only other person who knows the plotline, he should be the one to tell it. So Jake writes a novel based off of Evan's idea, and he finds all of the success he once thought would be directed at his former student. Life is going great for Jake, and he even starts a new and exciting relationship. Until one day, he finds out that he is not in fact the only person who knew about Evan's story. An anonymous person claims to know where Jake got the story from and is threatening to tell the whole world that he stole it. That's about as much as I can say about the storyline of the plot without any spoilers. I do think the idea is interesting and compelling. I mean, after all, I did buy and read the book. And without telling you what exact twists and turns the story takes, I will say that it did surprise me. The most notable thing about the plot to me is that Jake is an inherently unlikable main character. I will be talking more about how and why he's so unlikable in a little bit, but I wanted to point it out now because having a character that you don't like be the focus of a story can stop you from finishing that story. In this case, the plot was interesting enough to keep me reading despite the fact that I really didn't enjoy having to follow Jake along. I think that's a pretty impressive balance to be able to strike, and it serves a testament to just how interesting this book was. On the negative side, my biggest complaint with the plot is that sometimes the writing itself is a little bit hard to follow. There are a lot of very, very long sentences, very winding sentences, and very big blocks of text. This is especially true at the beginning of the book, and it does get better towards the end, but I just wanted to point it out because it was a little bit hard to navigate at times. I'm someone who actually finds reading like the easiest way to absorb information. It's easier for me to read a book than listen to it or watch a video about it, so that's not something that I usually struggle with. But with this book, I just thought that sometimes the sentences were just way too long. But yeah, that's about all that I can say without getting into spoilers. Overall, I would say if what I have described about the plot so far seems interesting, it's definitely worth a read. But with that, let's go ahead and jump into the more exciting part of this review with all of the spoilers. In the plot, the story that Jake writes and becomes famous off of is called Crib. It tells the story of a 15-year-old girl named Samantha who is trying to escape her boring life by going to college. However, she falls pregnant, and her religious parents force her to not only give birth to the baby, but also keep and raise it. Samantha ends up dropping out of high school to take care of baby Maria, and she basically has to give up all of her hopes and dreams for a child that she never wanted to have in the first place. As Maria grows older, she neither gives nor receives love when it comes to her mother. It's funny because they actually are quite similar. Maria also wants to escape her life by furthering her education, and she plans on going to college out of state. When Samantha finds out about this, a fight ensues and Maria is killed. Because Samantha is so young for a mother and she also happens to look a lot like her daughter, she ends up faking her own death with Maria's body and then going off to live Maria's life at college. As it turns out, Evan got inspiration for the story from his family, and it is rooted in fact rather than fiction. The character that Jake names Samantha is actually Evan's real-life sister, Diana. So even though Evan is dead and gone and can't come after Jake for stealing his story, Diana is very much alive under an assumed identity, and she is extremely unhappy that someone is airing her dirty laundry out to the world, even if the world just views it as a novel. Diana, under the name Anna, pretends to be a fan of Jake's, orchestrates a way to meet him, and winds up seducing and marrying him. All the while, she is also posing as an anonymous online account named Talented Tom. Talented Tom is the one who is threatening to reveal to the world that Jake is in fact a plagiarist. Jake goes on a whole adventure investigating Evan and trying to figure out who could possibly also know the plot of Crib and where it came from, and eventually he learns the truth about Evan's inspiration. He is able to surmise that Talented Tom is Diana, but doesn't realize that that person is also his wife until it is too late. Anna ends up faking a suicide note, drugging Jake, and murdering him to get rid of the only other person alive who knows about her past. It's definitely a very interesting story, and I have a lot of thoughts about it that we can finally dive into now that I've gotten all of the plot out of the way, spoilers and all. Something I found very interesting about the plot is that it centers around a story that is guaranteed to sell. Before it is revealed to the reader what exactly that story is, it's teased that it doesn't fit into any common trope. It is completely singular, utterly thrilling, and entirely unexpected. This means two things. One, that Korelitz had to come up with that story. She had to come up with the plot line that would be guaranteed to mean instant success for whoever writes it. And two, Korelitz also had to write a story surrounding that of Crib. In the plot, when Evan is describing the story he has to write, he says, "This story will be read by everybody. It will make a fortune. It will be made into a movie, probably by somebody really important, like an A-list director. It will get all the brass rings, you know? Like Oprah will pick it for her book thing. It will be talked about on TV shows. TV shows where they don't usually talk about books. Every book club, every blogger, everything I don't even know about. This book, there's no way it can fail." That is a heck of a boast, and I found it very interesting that Korelitz was able to not only come up with that story, but one to surround it, because the surrounding story had to be so good that it would merit not just writing Crib. In general, I find stories with layers fascinating, but I think that the plot is a layered story that's kind of unlike most that I read in the way that it's layered, and I also think that it had a pretty high stake to it. So I couldn't make this review without talking about the fact that I was pretty impressed that Korelitz managed to write that. If you've been in any sort of creative space, but especially online creative spaces, you've probably seen that there is kind of a debate between whether people are born with talent or whether they find talent through practice. This is a debate that's explored a lot in this novel. On several occasions, Jake talks about just how hardworking he is and how from a very young age he put in just unbelievable amounts of effort and concentration into realizing his dream of becoming an author. He's bitter because he does not have very much success to show for the amount of effort he put in. Jake also seems to think that he's kind of owed because of that effort by the universe. When he talks about ideas for writing, he talks about them as though they are given to authors. Jake seems to inherently believe that instead of ideas coming from within someone, they are stumbled upon or given to somebody by the universe. Like you have to be lucky enough to be gifted a plotline. I think that if Jake were capable of doing just a little bit of introspection, he would realize that he's wrong and that's not actually why he finds it so hard to do the thing that he claims to love. I actually think that there are two reasons why Jake has such a hard time writing. First of all, there's his own logic that you have to be gifted an idea or you have to luck into an idea. Because of that state of mind, I think that Jake spends a lot of time sitting around waiting for inspiration instead of going out and looking for it. For example, if your dream has always been to touch the snow, say you live in a very warm climate and you've never touched the snow. If you spend your entire life inside and you never go outside, you are never going to touch the snow. It's very much the same with Jake, where I think that he expresses that he has this dream of writing and he wants to be this great author, and he's just kind of waiting for a plotline to fall into his lap instead of trying to go out and find things that make him want to create. That brings us into the second issue, and that is that Jake creates for what I think could be considered the wrong reasons. I do want to say there's nothing wrong with finding success from your artistic talents. There's nothing wrong with being able to have monetary gain from being creative. But I think that there is a difference between being someone who is passionate about what they make and they happen to find success from that, and someone who creates because the only goal they have is to make money off of it. I think there's just a different feeling in the art that they end up creating, and I feel like consumers can sense that. And to me, Jake falls into the category of people who is creating so that he can be successful rather than because he loves it. When Jake narrates about being a young child and his dreams of becoming an author, he says, "Sometimes with books he especially loved, he imagined that he had actually written them himself and was giving interviews about them to critics or reviewers, or reading from them to large avid audiences in a bookstore or some hall full of occupied seats. He imagined his own photograph on the back jacket flap of a hardcover and thought far too often about sitting at a table signing copies for a long, coiling line of readers." On occasion, Jake does talk about the actual writing of a book, but most of the time when he talks about being an author and why he's always wanted to accomplish that, he talks about the celebrity he assumes will accompany it. He wants to be a writer more than he wants to write. In short, Jake seems focused on just the wrong things. It's an aspect of his character that definitely helps to introduce that issue of talent versus hard work and to explore it, but it's also part of what makes him so insufferable. From the start of the novel, I knew that I wasn't going to like Jake, and the more that I read, the more I disliked him. I have a lot of thoughts and feelings in this section in particular, so if it's a little bit all over the place, I do apologize, but frankly, I just really needed to rant about how terrible Jake is. One of the first things that we learn about Jake's character, right off the bat in the novel, is that he's a very jealous person. He manages to both be aware of his flaws and lack of accomplishments, while at the same time thinking that he's better than everyone in any room that he happens to set foot in. A great example of this is the way that he interacts with Evan. Both Evan and Jake have a pretty big ego. Evan openly brags about how amazing the story he has is and how great he is for being the person who gets to tell it. Jake, pretty much immediately upon meeting Evan, expresses distaste for that ego. And yet Jake seems to believe that he is somehow deserving of praise and that he should be treated with reverence despite, by his own parameters, not being successful. I think this is a really good example of the idea that the things that we dislike in others are the things that we secretly and shamefully can see within ourselves. Jake exudes a false confidence and a false sense of worth, and yet when he meets someone, Evan, who has a very similar sense of self-assuredness, he's repulsed by it. So right from the get-go of the plot, you realize that Jake is jealous and also incapable of recognizing the hypocrisy within himself. And as the novel goes on, you realize that in addition to those things, he's also mean and unempathetic. Upon finding success after writing Crib, Jake finds himself bombarded online by other authors. They want to connect to him because he's found success, and they want to talk to him or get his opinions on their manuscripts. He remarks that he can't be an asshole to other writers because of the potential blowback that would have on social media. Jake specifically decides to be kind to other writers that are in the same position he used to be in, not because it's the right thing to do or because he wants to be kind to them, but because he is afraid of the repercussions if he's not. Jake is incapable of being moral just for the sake of being moral, and instead is only making moral decisions on occasion out of fear of the consequences. During the course of his investigation on Evan, Jake realizes that the Parker family has undergone several different tragedies. Right after finding out about them, he says he couldn't muster more than baseline human empathy for these ancillary members of Evan Parker's family, not just because he didn't truly care about any of these people, but because none of the events under discussion, a sister's premature and apparently grisly death, a carbon monoxide poisoning in an old house decades ago, even, at the end of the day, Evan Parker's own opiate overdose, had any real bearing on his own very current, very pressing concerns. When he is thinking only to himself instead of speaking to other people, as he was in the quote I just shared with you, Jake doesn't even try to hide his disdain for the suffering of others. He very clearly states that he is unmoved by the Parker family's immense suffering because his own problems are just so much more pressing. It's almost violently selfish of him to admit this, even to himself, and it's not the only time he does something like this. After uncovering the full truth of where the story of Crib came from, Jake is finally able to shake the fear that has been with him the entire story. The entire time that you are reading this book, Jake is afraid that the world is going to know that he stole Evan's story. But after finding out the truth, he's finally able to shake that fear, only because he realizes that he can kind of beat talented Tom to the punch, reveal the truth himself in the form of a true crime novel, and capitalize off of the tragedy that inspired the events of Crib. Jake literally has this thought while standing at the grave of Evan's murdered niece. It kind of makes you feel as though he genuinely is incapable of feeling sympathy or empathy for other people. That lack of empathy can also be seen in the way he treats his significant other, Anna. Before it is revealed that she is in fact Diana, Anna is described as the stereotypically perfect woman. She's beautiful, she's talented, she's a great cook, she gets along with Jake's family, she literally uproots her entire life in one state to move to be with Jake in another, and she introduces him to all sorts of fun social gatherings. Yet when she realizes that Jake's mood is off and she wants to be there to help him, he reacts with anger. Despite all the good that Anna has done for him up to this point, Jake resents her for wanting to be there for him. The only way I can describe this type of thinking is that it seems very incel and very misogynistic. Jake really enjoys having Anna in his life as an accessory to his life, but when she truly wants to be a part of his world, he views her as the bad guy. And throughout all of this, all of these terrible things that Jake is doing, the worst part is that he constantly views himself as the victim. Jake thinks he did nothing wrong by taking Evan's idea and writing Crib. On numerous occasions, he commiserates that the story was free game once Evan died. He's not a plagiarist because he did the actual writing himself. He changed characters' names. He didn't steal a word that Evan wrote. He just stole the story. And Jake says that you can't steal an idea. Despite the fact that Jake seems to have always viewed himself as the victim, I viewed him as the bad guy pretty much from page one. And there's a reason that he is both the main character and the villain simultaneously. Most books have main characters that are flawed, but ultimately that you can root for. In those types of novels, you keep reading because you want to see the characters succeed and you want to follow them along their path to success. But in the plot, rather than reading for the main character, I kept reading despite him. Instead of having a connection with the main character that fueled my desire to keep going with the story, I kept reading because I was frustrated with him and I wanted to see him finally get his comeuppance. And eventually, he does. He literally pays the ultimate price for his actions. If you were to look at an outline of the plot, technically speaking, it has a bad ending. As awful a person as Jake is, legally, he really didn't do anything wrong. Yeah, his actions were definitely not moral or ethical throughout most of the novel, but he also didn't deserve to die. Seeing a main character killed by someone who was murdered before should read as a bad ending. And yet, somehow it doesn't, at least not entirely. I spent the whole novel having to follow along with Jake. I had to be there with all of his self-righteousness, his cowardice, his selfishness, and his lack of empathy. So while I can logically say that he didn't deserve death, I can't say that he didn't deserve some form of punishment. That's not at all to say that I would wish this scenario on a real human being, no matter how terrible they are. What I'm trying to illustrate is that by having Jake be such an unlikable character, Korelitz creates a story that has a morally gray ending. Yes, a murderer gets away with killing and not for the first time, but also a man who never once throughout the course of the story thought of someone other than himself finally gets his comeuppance. You definitely can't say in black and white terms that that's a good thing, but emotionally you can't view it as all bad either. I really like books like The Plot that have ambiguous endings like this. Of course, happy ending stories have a time and a place, but more often I find myself drawn to stories that have an outrightly bad ending, or an ambiguous ending, or one that makes me think, or makes me uncomfortable. And I would definitely say that The Plot has an ending that makes you think. I already said in the spoiler-free section of this video that I would recommend The Plot, and obviously I still stand by that. I don't think that it's going to be one of my favorite books. I'm someone who tends to reread books over and over and over again, and I can't see myself rereading The Plot very often, but I am glad that I read it at least once, so I would recommend it in that sense. If any of you guys have also read The Plot, I would love to hear your thoughts like I said earlier. I also mentioned that this is my first book review I have ever posted, so I would also love your feedback on the video format itself. And if you guys did enjoy it, if you could like and subscribe for more, that would mean a lot to me. But I hope you guys have a lovely rest of your day or your night or whatever it might be, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye, guys!